The county of Callaway was created with Missouri statehood in 1821, with its first county seat at a community called Elizabeth, about 6 miles south-southeast of Fulton. At that time, the county court issued orders for a jail to be built, but no courthouse. After changing the county seat to Fulton in 1825, the court appointed 3 commissioners to submit a plan and cost estimate for a courthouse on the square. The court initially appropriated $550. Apparently, subsequent appropriations raised the final cost to about $1,300. A portion of the funding came from a forfeited bond. According to the 1884 history of Callaway County, the first courthouse was built in Fulton by Joshua Ferguson and grandson T.J. Ferguson in 1826. It was 36 feet square, built of brick, 2 stories high with a brick floor on the first story, and the total cost at over $1,300. At the time, it was considered to be one of the finest courthouses west of the Mississippi River. The brick courthouse was described as a model of neatness, comfort, and convenience. It was finished early in 1827, and the courtroom seems to have been on the first floor. It was in use until 1856, when the building was raised, and the building materials were sold for a total of $400. On August 24, 1854, the court directed George W. Braley, the commissioner, to prepare plans and submit estimates for a new building. Apparently, Braley submitted the temple-style design of Solomon Jenkins, which the court approved on May 25, 1855. The following day, the court awarded the contract for the construction for $17,850 to Alfred Moore, who reported the building as being completed in 1856. Grading the yard about the square and repairing the stone wall completed the project in May of 1858. The building was an elongated building, west-facing, with 6 large columns on the west end. The gable ran east and west, with a large clock tower at the west end. No known photographs exist of the Callaway County Courthouse before remodeling. The second courthouse was remodeled in 1885 in accordance with designs by M. Fred Bell, a local architect, who also supervised the construction work. The 1885 remodel added a mansard roof at the cornice line, and the remodel design also preserved the clock tower but reshaped the dome. Builder W.A. Gregory of Fulton received the contract for the rework for a total of $4,875. The building was demolished in 1938, with Governor Lloyd C. Stark buying the lumber of the building, presumably for his use at his Stark's nurseries. Callaway County began earnestly considering a new courthouse in 1938 when they learned that federal funds would be available. The court looked at courthouses in Pike, Marion, and Knox counties and talked with representatives in many state firms before employing architects E.C. Henderson, Jr. and Paul Elsner, who prepared the plans for the 3-story building with a jail. Bonds were voted for $125,000 in June of 1938. Federal contribution was $102,273, and final figures ran close to $2,500. E.J. Hartman contracted and built the 134-foot by 80-foot, 3-story brick and stone structure with the principal entrance facing north. The court accepted the completed building in December of 1939. Dedication of the courthouse, that still houses county officials, took place on March 18, 1940. The county court, during the design process of the courthouse, selected 8 events in the history of Callaway County that were among the most significant in the county's history. In this selection process, the court drew heavily on Ovid Bell's short history of Callaway County for those events. 8 large medallions of stone were fabricated for installation on the exterior of the courthouse. The medallions appear, 2 on each face, between the first and second floors near the corners. On the border, directly above the medallions, above the second story, or emblazoned the names of 8 individuals of significant importance in American jurisprudence. Much of the description of these historic events that follow in this presentation are extracted from Ovid Bell's Short History of Callaway County. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson commissioned the Corps of Discovery and named U.S. Army Captain Meriwether Lewis as its leader, who selected William Clark as his partner. Their goals were to explore the Louisiana Purchase, establish trade and U.S. sovereignty over the native peoples along the river Missouri. Jefferson also wanted to establish a U.S. claim of discovery to the Pacific Northwest and Oregon Territory by documenting an American presence there before Europeans could claim the land. There were 33 people, including 29 participants, in the training at the 1803-1804 Camp Du Bois winter staging area in the Illinois Territory near present-day Hartford, Illinois. They left on May 14, 1804, and met up with Lewis in St. Charles, Missouri. A short time later, the Corps followed the Missouri River westward. Soon they passed La Charrette, the last vestige of American settlement on the Missouri River. The expedition followed the Missouri River through what is now Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha, Nebraska. On August 20, 1804, the Corps met their objective of reaching the Pacific, mapping and establishing their presence for a legal claim to the land. They established diplomatic relations and trade with at least 24 indigenous tribes. They did not find the Northwest Passage. The first settlement of white men in the county was at Cote-Sandison, where in 1808 a few French traders established a village and built a fort. The historian Rose, who was not always accurate, says the settlement was formed before 1800, but cites nothing to prove his statement, while Henry M. Brackenridge, who visited it in 1811, says the village was about 3 years old at the time of his visit. The history of the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 through 1806 does not speak of Cote-Sandison, presumably because it did not exist at the time, while the Reverend John Mason Peck positively fixes the date as 1808. Grants of land in the county were made as early as 1800. However, for in that year, Baptiste Duchouquet of the city of St. Louis obtained a grant of 4,000 arpents from Spain, the cession being known even now as Survey number 1837. Cote-Sandison was built on the land granted to Duchouquet. Daniel Boone is credited with having crossed Callaway County in 1808 in company with Captain Clemson, who was on his way to establish Fort Osage. Until a few years ago, an oak tree stood on 9 Mile Prairie, which was inscribed D.B. 1808, and local tradition says that the letters and figures were carved by Boone. 7 years after that time, Colonel Nathan Boone, a son of Daniel Boone, surveyed the Boonslick Trail from St. Charles to Old Franklin, which was directly across from current-day Booneville. And the following year, Colonel Boone, with Joseph Evans, began a survey of Callaway County, which was completed in 1870. The first minister to settle in the county was the Reverend John Ham, who came in 1815. He was a Methodist, though 2 of his brothers were ministers of the Baptist Church. Next to come probably was the Reverend William Coates, a primitive Baptist for whom Coates Prairie was named, and who settled here in 1817. Campbell says that Reverend James E. Welsh and Reverend John M. Peck, both Baptists, reached the county during the years 1817, 1818, and 1819. The Reverend John Scripps, a Methodist circuit rider, held services in the county in the summer of the fall of 1818 and probably was the first minister of his denomination to visit Callaway County in a clerical capacity. In the fall of 1818, John Scripps, a Methodist preacher, made his first visit to the county and preached the first night at William Nash's and the next night at my father's, John S. Ferguson, and continued to preach at my father's house 1 year. For more than 20 years afterwards, my father's house was the preaching place for the neighborhood. My mother, Mary Ferguson, Hannah Ramsey, Josiah Ramsey, and old Tom Nash, colored, constituted the first Methodist class formed in this neighborhood and probably in the county. Old Josiah Ramsey was appointed class leader, and being a pious man, he held prayer meetings every Sabbath at some place in the neighborhood. The first session of the Circuit Court was held on February 5, 1821, at the Tavern of Henry Bright at the northwest corner of Ham's Prairie, about 1½ miles northwest of the present village of that name. Rufus Pettibone of St. Charles, afterward a member of the state Supreme Court, presided, holding his commission from Governor McNair. The grand jury called for that term of court was the first to meet in the county, and was composed of James Van Vever, Samuel Miller, James Guthridge, Patrick Ewing, Thomas Hornbuckle, Robert Craghead, Robert Criswell, Josiah Ramsey, Jr., Richard Humphreys, James Henderson, John Nevins, Arthur Neal, Robert Reed, William Coates, James Langley, William H. Dunica, John Gibson, William Hall, John Evans, Thomas Smith, and Wharton Moore. Mr. Moore was foreman. The jury reported to the court that there was no business to come before it and was discharged. A week later, on February the 12th, 1821, the county court met at the same place. Much of the business of the first session of the court concerned highways as it does today and has throughout the county's history. The Banner of Liberty, established in Fulton in 1839 by Warren Woodson, Jr., was the first newspaper published in the county. The next year, Isaac Curd and William Henry Russell became editors of the paper and changed its name to the Fulton Reformer. Then the new name was changed to the Western Star by W.A. Stewart, who remained in charge until 1843. Duncan and Goggin in 1845 renamed the paper to the Fulton Telegraph. Callaway County's first railroad, which was one of the first completed in the state, was built between the years of 1855 and 1857 and extended from Cote Sanderson back into the county a distance of about 7 miles to a large Cannel coal mine. The railroad was built by Callaway Mining and Manufacturing Company, which was chartered by the General Assembly in 1847 and was composed primarily of Pennsylvania men. The company planned to mine Cannel coal extensively and also to extract oil from the coal and sell it for commercial uses. To this end, a railroad was built, a mine was opened, an oil factory erected, and a number of houses were constructed for the use of their employees. After the railroad was built, the product of the mine was shipped on a steamboat owned by the company to both St. Louis and Jefferson City. The enterprise proved to be a wild dream of riches, for the demand of coal was small, while the oil-producing scheme was impractical. The property was sold at a trustee's sale in St. Louis on September 26, 1859, and was bid in at $95. At least part of the first railroad track built by the company was laid with wooden rails, and it is said that horses were first used as motive power. The whole of the track was finally laid with steel rails and a locomotive put into use. Traces of the old track and the foundations of the building are yet to be found. A large number of men from Callaway County were engaged in the Civil War, the estimate being from 800 to 1,100 on the Confederate side and approximately 350 on the Union side. Accurate records were not kept, and probably the names of many persons from the county who enlisted in the conflict have been lost forever. The first company to leave the county was organized by Captain Daniel H. McIntyre, afterward Attorney General of Missouri, in response to the call of Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson. Captain McIntyre was a student in his senior year at Westminster College when he left in April for the war, and though absent from commencement in June 1861, the faculty granted him his degree. His company contained 5 students of the college. At least 14 other companies of Confederates, not all of them full, however, left the county during the war. Fulton was occupied during the greater part of the war by Union soldiers and militia, and Southern sympathizers were in constant fear of imprisonment and death. A number of non-combatants were killed in the county by soldiers, most of the crimes being committed by Krekel's Dutch. The name Kingdom of Callaway came to the county during the Civil War through a treaty negotiated by John B. Henderson, representing the Union, and Colonel Jefferson F. Jones, representing the people of Callaway County. In October 1861, General Henderson, with a considerable force of militia, started from Louisiana in Pike County to Callaway, intending to invade the county and bring its citizens under subjection to the Union. Hearing of the project, Colonel Jones assembled 300 or 400 men and boys and went into camp at Brown Spring on Avoz Creek, east of the present Mexico Road crossing. After drilling his men a few days, Colonel Jones, on the morning of Sunday, October 27th, sent an envoy under the flag of truce into Wellsville, where Henderson and his men were located, and that day a treaty was made whereby Henderson agreed not to attempt to invade Callaway County, and Colonel Jones agreed to disband his force. Both sides kept the agreement, and thereby the county obtained a name which probably will last throughout the ages. The names of those individuals appearing on the upper border of the four faces of the courthouse are Patrick Henry, lawyer and patriot; Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., lawyer, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court; Henry Clay, lawyer and statesman; John C. Calhoun, lawyer, statesman, and Vice President; Joseph Choate, lawyer, statesman, Hague Peace Conference representative; John Marshall, lawyer, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court; William Howard Taft, lawyer, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, U.S. President; Edward Douglass White, lawyer and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. All of these men were in the law, forming, making, and upholding it.